welcome to Relate to You. And, we're very excited because we have sort of like a new setup, a little detail that we hope you guys enjoy. Today we're here with one of our favorites, which is This Is My Conviction series. I think this would be our third episode?
Third episode.
Third episode?
Ministry, modesty, and this time
we're doing tithing. Well, I think whenever we talk about money, it tends to be very, delicado, and it tends to be very sensitive. But obviously we're coming from a place of experience. We're coming from a place of, this is our opinion. We're not trying to convince you to tithe or to give your offering or anything.
Right.
We're just talking about this is our
conviction.
Yes, this is my conviction. And as to why it is our conviction. So we hope you enjoy it. We'll try to keep it to a minimal because we know that it can be a very tough topic. So, Kes, let's get started with, I guess, the very obvious question, which is, do you tithe?
Do I tithe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. First of all, what is a tithe?
What is a tithe? So, depending on what faith you identify with, or if you don't identify with any set of religious beliefs, the way that we, in a sense, finance our worship, not our worship, but in a sense, the place that we worship is with money. Just like, you put money towards Netflix, you put towards a lot of things. I think that we forget that in the church, there is also that concept of the lights need to be paid, the electricity, the gas, the water, etc. And so the concept of the tithe derives from the Old Testament, specifically in our Christian faith. And so we've committed, in a sense, or we have this conviction of 10% of our income goes towards the church. And that money is used to finance all that goes in the church. That means, obviously, we work at church or we've worked at church. And so we've seen that money directly as far as, when we have events, when we have community resource events and outreach and stuff like that, we see, in a sense, those dollars be put to work. Sometimes there's a need. I remember one of the biggest things that our current pastor did was that he established a solid children's ministry. We had one before, but they really I can't even talk.
Revamped it?
Renovated.
Yeah.
They renovated a section to create classrooms, and it was divided by age group. And that was something that our church had never had before. And so in a sense, that's what that money is used for. So that's initially what the tithe is for. In biblical terms, the tithe was used to give towards the priest, family. I could go further into detail, but basically the people of Israel would give a 10%, and it was actually more, for the record. It was not just 10%. I believe it was 23%.
Oh.
They would have different tithes for different things, but they would give a percentage of what they had, in different ways, in cattle, in grains, and whatever they had.
What was their means back then?
It was whatever their means were to, in a sense, the purpose of their establishment, for the priesthood, for them to give to God, their first fruits. And so in today's age, we see it in that way. But do I tithe? Yes, I do tithe. I tithe to our church. I haven't always, I'll be completely honest. Normally we start tithing when we start working. And, if you are really good about it, a lot of, I have seen it in the past that a lot of youth, the moment that they started working, they went ahead and started tithing. For me, it wasn't the case. Was I taught to tithe? Yes. That was something that was ingrained in me since I was a child. Whenever we didn't go to church and we had a rainy day or for whatever, church service was canceled,
Mhm.
you know, my parents would make it a point to have iglesita. And so we would have our own service, we would like sing and everything. And my mom would pass like a little bucket, you know, kind of in a sense of like, I'm going to put that in your mind to start already thinking about
Mhm.
this is important. And we would have our pennies and our nickels and we would throw it in there. And even growing up, I remember my mom would give me like $1 and she was like, okay, this is your tithe, you know, and you're going to go ahead and put it in the bucket. But when I had my first job, I didn't know how to really like be good at my finances. And so a lot of my money went into, you know, eating out and my new outfits y todo eso. Entonces, I can honestly say, you know, it took me a while to master um, tithing, you know, and giving more consistently.
What
But
what was it that gave you that conviction to be intentional about your tithing?
yeah. I've always believed that there is a blessing aspect to giving to not necessarily the church, but towards, you know, giving it to God. I've
Mm.
always seen that as a blessing because I believe in the very first story of Adam and Eve, where Cain and Abel, they give their first fruits to
Mhm.
God. And Cain in the story gives the best that he had from what means he had, he gave it to God. And Abel, or rather, I'm switching them,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Cain was the one that didn't give his good fruits,
Cain
and
told it,
he
yeah.
didn't give the best. He gave, you know, whatever was left over from his produce, that's what he gave to God. And so I've always viewed whatever you have is a sense of like worship. It's a sense of like, you know, thanksgiving to God. And so I
Mm.
always understood that from early age,
Mhm.
even though I didn't maybe apply it early on, but I knew I don't look at it, I'm going to put my money in the bucket and it's going to go to the church and oh my gosh, how they're using the money. And no, I never looked at it that way. It was always like, I'm giving from what I know God has already given me. And I believe that there's a blessing tied to that. That if I give the best of what I have to God, it's going to be returned to me.
Mhm.
So, you know, I'll stop there. What about you? Do you tithe? Do you currently believe in the tithe?
Yeah.
Where do you lie on that?
I do believe in tithing. I do tithe. No, I have two jobs, so I tithe. Oh, I try to tithe from both. Um, I think similar to you, I always believed in tithing. I think I thought it was a normal thing. My mom tithed all her or my growing life. So it was one of those things where I always assumed it was a given. It wasn't until I started to grow up and take it as like, oh well, we tithe, that I started realizing that people have different opinions about it.
Right.
That it's kind of like, oh, it's you either believe or you don't. And so that's I think that's a new thing. Well, not a new thing for me, but it's been a couple years now that I've realized that it's not a given like I thought it would be a given,
Right.
like it was for me. Um, and again, similar to you, even though it was a given, I didn't comply. It wasn't my conviction, I guess, or maybe it was, but no, it wasn't my conviction. I just, for a lot of things, I did see it like you said it. Why should I, in a way, why should I give my money when I haven't, I don't see results, sort of
Oh, I
like that.
see.
But I mean, I'm talking about years ago. This is years ago. But very interestingly enough, um, I started, or rather, I started offering, giving offering when I lived in Mexico for like a couple months, a couple years ago. Well, actually, a lot of years ago. And I would go to church with una de mis tías de allá de Mexico, and it was sort of like it wasn't our same
Doctrine.
doctrine. It was a different doctrine. I think they believed in the Trinity and stuff like that. It was a very like come as you are kind of doctrine. And I realized that I started giving without me thinking, but I would give my 10% of what I would earn because I
Mm.
had a job over there. And it wasn't a lot, but I would give it. And I think I did it also out of the example that I saw my tia, because my tia would give also her, not too sure if it was her tithe, but she would give money. And so it was sort of like, okay, I need to be thankful for, despite being in the situation that I am, I'm still blessed with having a job.
Right.
Like, my tia still, giving me a roof and food and everything. And so I think despite how dark those moments were, I found comfort in knowing that I was giving back a little bit of what God has given me.
Mm.
So after that, I come back to the U.S. and I start getting my act together in school and everything. Um, and then I graduate. I come back to church and I started thinking, why was I so prompt to give to that other church that wasn't really my church,
Mm.
but I'm having a hard time giving to my church, which pretty much I grew up in. I just never felt connected
Connected.
to, but I grew up in this church. So that thought really changed my mind, and I started. I wouldn't say I started tithing. I started offering. I would give it as an offering, kind of thing. I would give it as an offering, and um, but I did start tithing when I started working there.
Working at church.
Yeah, church. Yes.
I think for me, where I kind of started to be more consistent about it was when I got engaged.
Mm.
When I got engaged, things kind of changed for me because I was already in a different mindset of like, I'm planning to be married to someone, and not just that is going to change the way that I think and my perspective, but it was also like one of the biggest things that couples fight about is always regarding finances. It's always how are we going to agree with how we use the resources that we have? I might want to use it this way, you might want to use it that way. And I remember that the tithe was actually one of the first conversations we had, because even though I wouldn't say at the time like I had a straight A record of like I'm so consistent about this, and I wasn't the model for that.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to enter into my marriage without having this kind of set in stone,
Oh.
that it's important to me, because even though I wasn't applying it, I wanted it to be a conviction of mine. I wanted it to be something that, you and I use our finances to, yes, nourish ourselves and shelter ourselves, but we both agree that a portion of that should go towards, our thanksgiving to God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember that one of the first things that I, started thinking about was like, what if he doesn't like to tithe? Because again, I know that there are people who have different beliefs on this, and
Right.
specifically on the percentage. And I do think it's important to mention that the New Testament never actually mentions a set percentage of how much should be going towards giving. And that is where a lot of people get, kind of like theological, or kind of like, the New Testament doesn't say anything about it has to be a 10%. So I don't need to give 10% of my income. And in the Old Testament, it's like, well, it says it there. It says specifically, a tithe, a 10th% of your income. But we like the New Testament in a sense. But I think what to me in that mindset, I always tend to like find interesting, is that yes, the the percentage isn't in place, but if anything, Jesus talks about money more than any other topic in the Bible. I don't know if you've ever researched it, but more than anything, he talks about money. And no, it's not on tithing. He just talks about, in many ways, of where your heart should be regarding money.
Mm.
And when I look at that, I'm like, Jesus always took the Old Testament principle and took it beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
His method was, I don't want you to just think that adultery is bad and a sin. I want you to retract and think lust is where it's starting. So Jesus is the one that says, if you even look at a woman lustfully, you have already committed adultery with her in her mind, in your mind. Which again, I don't know if we've ever really like gone down to that. He's saying if you look at someone, male and female, lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your mind. It's not to say that, oh my gosh, the standard is that much higher and we're imperfect and we're never going to be, holy. No, what he's trying to say is it starts here. It starts in your mind. So if you are having this idea of like, well, the New Testament doesn't mention it, if you really think about it, the standard is much higher in the New Testament. He even says, before you even think of murdering, if you are angry with your brother, just angry, like there is already sin in your heart. Like again, he comes back to why you're doing what you're doing, why you're thinking about what you're doing. So I don't have a conviction on the 10%. I'll be honest. I don't think that I'm going to go to hell if I don't give 10%. That's not where my conviction lies. My conviction is that I should always give of my best to the Lord. And in the way that I directly apply that is in my tithe. And so sometimes what I give is strictly the 10%, because I don't know for those of you that tithe, but for me, doing the 10% sometimes is hard. Sometimes just the bare minimum, which is how I see it, is a lot. I see that as like, man, like, for example, like for us, Joel and I, we like to eat, and so eating out is probably the majority of where our finances go. And if you really think about it, 10%, is a good amount of money. And people think about, they're like, I would rather put 10% towards what we like to do, towards an outing, towards a new outfit, towards something for the house, And so the way that I see it is, even though 10% is not my conviction, like I don't believe I'm going to go to hell, where my conviction is, I have to give to the Lord. Y donde a mí sí me duele is like, okay, pusimos nuestro dinero en otra área en vez de darle lo mejor o en vez de darle lo primero a Dios. Y eso ha sucedido. Yo no me voy a sentar aquí y decir, oh my God, Joel and I have never missed a tithe, or we've never, no, of course, we're human. Just like we've mentioned in ministry and mentioned in modesty, our convictions are our convictions, but we're imperfect. But it is my conviction to give, and one of the things, like to kind of close that, was that I remember having this conversation with my mom, and I remember saying, like, what if Joel doesn't want to tithe? What if he has an issue with that? What if he's like, I don't even believe we should give to the church? Is that a deal breaker? And I remember having this conversation with my mom, and I remember that she's like, well, we don't know, before you have that conversation, we don't know how he's going to think. But whenever someone has those, like, why are we giving to the church? Or why does it have to be 10%? It's never really because they want to give more.
It's because they want to give less.
It's because they want to give less or give nothing, and you'll never hear someone that's saying, oh, well, the Bible doesn't say, a percent, or rather the New Testament doesn't say a percentage. You don't ever see those people make that argument because they're like, it should be 20, it should be 30. Most of them are like, because 10% is a lot. And I remember, my mom was like, the most that you can do is kind of share how you feel and what you're trying to build in your marriage, and then see where he's at. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that Joel grew up very similar to me, with Christian parents, and in the same way my in-laws instilled in them the tithe. So it was never like pulling teeth with him of like, we're going to put a portion of this in our finances towards our tithe. And so I do see the value in it, so that's what I would say as far as like where it kind of like really started to shift. But I want to ask you, for me, it was trying to establish a a principle in my future
Right.
for my marriage. Why did you start tithing when you started working at church?
Um, I do think that part of me felt embarrassed. Yeah,
Embarrassed.
because again, I had started giving my tithe, but I would do it as an offering
Okay.
because I didn't I don't think I was too knowledgeable about like, no, this is something you need to sort of let the church know if you want to. If you
Oh, I
want to.
see.
So I would put it in the bucket, and I wouldn't have an envelope or anything.
Oh, got it,
So I
got it.
didn't have a record. Um and and if I'm being honest, till this day I'm not too understanding as to why we have records of people that tithe. You know, to me at least back then it seemed like, so long as God and I know that I'm giving my
I agree.
10% or whatever, that's all that matters to me,
Mhm.
right? So, but then when I started working at church, it sort of felt like, so people do write their like in the envelope, and they do perhaps not want people to know, but it is. I don't know. I feel like I saw the process of it, the behind the scenes process of it, and I thought, oh, should I be doing that too? And I think that's why I felt embarrassed of like, oh, man, there's a lot of things I don't know about church, or the logistics of tithing and offering. And so
Right.
once I started seeing the process of that, I thought, oh, okay, yes, I don't think I was wrong in having a mentality of, as long as God and I know that I'm giving my 10, it's okay.
I don't think that's wrong.
But I did think that,
Just me though.
but I did think, well, perhaps también no está mal si un día lleno el envelope y le pongo, yes, it's tithe, and here it is. And I report it in a way,
Right.
record it. So, and I think that's as simple as it started. It's just out of embarrassment of not knowing that that's how things are done, perhaps. Y I was like, oh, y me sentí como, pues sí, ignorant. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna start doing it that way too.
But wouldn't you agree? Because even though I would say my consistency started when I got engaged, I do remember that working at church did have an impact on my tithing, because instead of me coming from the perspective of like, what do they do with our money? It came from like, I'm now working in finances and I know specifically how we use the finances in the church, that also made me feel like con más gozo lo voy a hacer because I know what we're doing. Did that
Oh, I
happen?
see. I think that happened to me earlier. Not when I started working at church. I'm not too sure if it was our pastor or a preaching I heard, but the preacher was saying that la ofrenda la das por amor y el diezmo lo das por deber.
Oof.
And that really stuck with me. And I don't think it was pastor. If it was, I'm sorry, pastor, but I don't think it was pastor, because he went on to say, every time you flush the toilet, how do you think we pay for it? Con oración, and like this preacher was really going at it, like he was saying, a lot of you come to church asking, y denme, y que sean las mejores canciones, y el mejor sonido, y las mejores luces, y que todos estén bien amables, y todo esto.
The best visitor bag.
Yes, the best of the best, y denme. Pero les dices, den una ofrenda, y ¿por qué? ¿Por qué? Si yo ni uso esto, si yo ni uso aquello. And so I think the preacher ese día, he made a really good point of like, every time you flush the toilet, every time you come here y las luces, aunque no estén de tu agrado, están prendidas. Every time that you come in y te lavas las manos, es porque hay agua, se pagó ese bill. O sea, se están pagando todos los utilities of this building, huge building. Y ponernos roñosos porque nos dicen, da con lo que tú puedas.
Exactly.
O sea, ni siquiera te están diciendo, denme así en todos, ándenle. No, es porque es, and this pastor has said it, it's equal sacrifice, not equal amount.
Exactly.
And so I think when I heard that preaching, I thought, oh my God, that is true. Y sí salió en mí, like, yo sí quiero quiero demostrarle a mi iglesia que la amo. Quiero demostrarle a Dios que amo mi iglesia. Entonces voy a dar ofrenda. Pero el deber es mi diezmo. El deber es el diezmo. And so eso sí no es, I guess the preacher was sort of saying like, that's non-negotiable. And I'm not too sure if he went, no me acuerdo si if he went on about to say like the percentages.
Right.
But I do think his point was, tienes que dar de lo mucho que has recibido y un 10% no es nada. Si lo vemos in a very like, I think you were tapping on that too, of like nos vamos a comer a otros lados, we spend money on other stuff que really are, it's ephemeral, pero cuando es de darle a Dios lo que es de Dios, ahí sí, ay, 10% de mi chequecito de 500, pues como que no, ¿verdad?
Right.
Entonces ya nos duele. And I think that started earlier than
Later.
Than later. I think that mentality always stuck with me, and I think that is why se me hizo fácil hacerme to be very intentional about my tithing, because I had already that mentality of like, oh, that is true. Offering is out of love, and tithing is a duty, out of duty. And so I think eso fue. Y también ya another thing that ahorita me estaba acordando es que lo que hizo más fácil para mí fue que I wanted to implement a discipline in my finances. I think very, very similar to what you were doing in your marriage. Yo lo quería hacer in my finances because I still have a spending problem. But I did notice that when I decided to be intentional about my tithing and I decided to ser un dador alegre, yes, a veces no soy muy alegre al dar, pero sí lo hago. I did notice que perhaps el problema de spending no se fue porque ese soy yo, esa es mi responsabilidad, pero my income problems, if I had any, I really don't think I had any, pero I did see que that started getting better. Mm-hmm. Like the moment I started to be intentional about income, I saw God's providence even more. Right. Like, yes, even though todavía tenía problemas with my spending, God would still provide. Until this day, I'm not going to say que soy I have my finances in check, no? I'm still working on that, and obviously me cuesta trabajo porque soy chiqueada, vivo en casa, mi mami me cocina, mi mami me compra muchas cosas y it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like and so me cuesta, pero sí he notado que se viene, I don't know, se me viene un gasto de mi carro. And God has provided, and I think part of that provision, and I'm not saying it's a tit for tat, como le dicen.
Right.
I'm not saying like it's
this for that.
This for that, but I do think que, como dices tú, es una blessing of being intentional about giving.
Right.
Entonces, se viene un gasto, se viene una emergency o algo, I have had the money to give into that, or, to spend into whatever. Like el año pasado tuve muchos problemas con mi carro, and I managed to get some of that done. And God, I saw his provision. I saw him providing. Y entonces, me he dado cuenta yo que cuando yo doy, él da 10 times more.
100%.
Y no estoy diciendo finances. In a lot of things, in a lot of areas. Cuando yo doy lo mínimo a veces, he makes it so that I feel like he's giving me back 10 times more of that. And I think because of that principle and because of that, I keep giving. I keep trying to be as intentional as possible.
I think for me, one of the things that like shaped my perspective as far as why I give was from my pastor. He taught me this concept of, because we were talking about tithing, we were talking about giving. And, the question arose, well, how much should I give? If my conviction isn't, specifically the 10% of my income, how much should I give? And he said, anything that falls in your hand is what you should give. And he's like, the moment that you close your hand and you withhold from giving to the Lord, in the same way you also close your hand from receiving the blessings from God. And I think that sometimes people confuse that, even though that there is a connection between giving and blessing, I don't think that that should be the reason why people give. I don't think that that should be your goal of like, I'm going to give so that I could get, because it doesn't always work that way. But rather, I do think the practicality in having that discipline of, in this house, in this, me, my person, I'm going to make a commitment that the first of what I receive, whatever that amount is, whether it's 10%, whether it's 15%, whether it's 5%, am I going to give my best to the Lord? Because I think we forget that worship and in many ways, like, our devotion to the Lord only looks like prayer, and it only looks
Right.
like reading your word. No, your devotion and your worship to the Lord can look like you singing to the Lord and you worshiping physically in service, but it
Mm-hmm.
could also be in the way you are, the way you behave, the way you look, the way you treat others, the way you give.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what molded me to be like, okay, then it's not just going to be from my paycheck. It's going to be from that, $100 bonus. It's going to be from that, we just got a stimulus check,
Mm-hmm.
and for us personally, I know everybody does tithing differently. There are some people who tithe from their gross income, and there's people who tithe from their net income. We tithe from our net income. And so the reason why we report it is because when we have that, like that tax check, we tithe from that. And so for me, it's like the same way that, like, Pastor taught me of that concept of like everything that lands in your hand, you're gonna give. In the same way, the more that your hand is open and the more you're willing to give, the more you're also willing to receive.
Right.
And I have seen this. I have seen this in my life, and this is a testimony I have been waiting to, like, say for so long. A year ago, on this one's birthday, um, my husband had a situation. He had to be taken to the hospital, and it was such a scary time. And I remember that, thankfully, my husband has insurance from his job. But I remember when the bill got to the house, I was beyond scared.
Mm-hmm.
It was over 10 grand. And I was like, how on earth are we going to pay this? I have no idea. It was like this stress. And it was like one of those things that I remember literally every month me llegaba un bill from different things. It was from the ambulance ride, it was from the hospital visit, it was from this test and that test and
Mm.
this test and that test. And in my head, I thought, this is the first time I've ever experienced this,
Mm-hmm.
Like, my mom experienced hospital bills because of my dad. My sister experienced hospital bills because of her son, and I had heard, of these stories of, like, the hospital bill and, being in a hospital. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy how much it can cost. And I remember, like, I think you were the only person, that I really would, like, share to what was going on, of
Mm-hmm.
like the stress and the fear. Obviously Joel and I, we would talk about it and we would pray about it, and God's gonna make a way. And it was just one of those things of like, don't think about it. Like, just don't think about it, when it comes to the time that, it says, okay, you have to pay. Because the thing about it is, we weren't paying them because cada mes nos llegaba. So it was
Oh.
one of those things of like, when are we gonna get the last bill?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so anyways, this happened over like a span of I want to say about 9 months of just getting bills. And it was a constant reminder of like that scary day. And
Mm-hmm.
like, thankfully, he's fine, he's healthy. But it was like that reminder every time I got that bill. And I'm not saying this to sound holier than thou, but I'm thankful that throughout that whole year, we were faithful. We were faithful in our giving. And I remember that, on one occasion, I I I believe I got a letter that was stating like, you need to pay this. I think it was the official letter of like, this is how much is due,
Okay.
And so I called the insurance, and I remember saying, okay, hey, we have these bills, this is, the hospital visit from like a couple months ago, you know, how much is the insurance going to be able to pay so that we can officially know how much we have to put out of
Mm-hmm.
pocket. And I'm preparing myself because I've always heard of like, insurances, they pay the bare minimum, maybe 20% of your bill or max, 50%. To me, I was like, 50% is going to be
Mm-hmm.
like amazing, if we can do it, And I remember talking to this lady, and she was just like doing all the math. She's like, okay, so after everything, you guys are going to be left with a bill of about $273.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, what? And she was like, $273 is what you guys have to pay. And I said, wait, are you sure you have the right case? Like, are you sure? Like, this is how much we have to pay. And she said, yes, but your insurance is going to cover this and this and this and this. So you'll be left with $273. And Joel and I have her on speaker. We're just sitting there. And she's like, oh, and by the way, did you get like a debit card in the mail recently? And I said, yeah, we don't know what that's for. She's like, oh, great. I get to explain it to you. So here's the thing. Your insurance has a great perk where if you ever have like a copay or like something that, like after your insurance pays, there's still like a bill left over, you'll use that debit card to pay for that remaining bill. So just go ahead and use that bill to pay for that $273. And I remember sitting there like stunned, and I was just like, wait, so you're saying that in a sense we won't have to pay anything? And she's like, nope, you're pretty much all covered. And I like hung up, I cried. Joel was like, I can't even believe, that this happened. I literally like sent you a message. I sent a message to my in-laws, to my mom. Like, I was just like how how good God is, and I know someone on the other end watching this could be like, why are you crying? It just means you have good insurance. I don't see it like that. I don't see it as just, oh, Joel has really good insurance. I see it as that's God's faithfulness, in my life. Every time that in my own world, Joel and I decided to put God first, and we decided to give of what we had in our means, and it was a sacrifice. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we just have money to give, we're just going to give it. That whatever percentage that we gave was tough that month to give. That day was like God just covered all of it. And I know it sounds like crazy, but to me it's like that just shows yet again God's redeeming like hand. He could have allowed us to be like, hey, go figure it out, or you guys are two, working citizens, you guys will figure it out, but instead, like, God took a moment that was very scary for both of us and turned it in a sense of like, it's fine. It's covered. I've got you. I'm your protector. I'm your provider. I'm always going to be there. And instead of me looking back at that day with like that like stress and that fear and that like, oh my gosh, this happened, it was like a reminder of God's blessing, God's provision, God's faithfulness throughout. And I know, as I mentioned, not that shouldn't be your goal. Oh, I'm gonna give this so that maybe here in a year, who knows what I'm
I'll
gonna
cash
get.
it in.
I'll cash it in. No, it's in the same way that we were being faithful and putting God first and understanding that, this is a sense of our worship, is the same way that we've seen God work in our lives, more than he already has. Like, and I've told this, to Lula, like, if God didn't do anything for me from this point on, he's already done more than enough than what he should have done for me. So when these things happen, it's like, God, why? Like, you're good. You're so good. And so I do believe in many ways, the in a sense, the return of that blessing And it only reinforces to me why I give, you
Yeah.
know? And like, I wanted to mention the scripture because you mentioned it, um, equal sacrifice, not equal amount. In 2 Corinthians, it says 9:7, it says, each one of you must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. When you give, whatever that is, if your conviction is 10%, your conviction is 10%. But whatever that amount is, give it cheerfully, give it happily, give it knowingly. This is something that I'm choosing to do and give to God. Because at the end of the day, that's like, in a sense, God isn't reluctant to bless you. God isn't reluctant to provide for you. So then why should we be reluctant to give to Him?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And so I do believe in the blessing, and I do wanted to like share that testimony, because like to me it's like I've been waiting for like a podcast for me to be able to say this, because it's specifically in the
To that,
finance
yeah.
department that was very scary, you
Mm-hmm.
know? But I don't know if you have a testimony or any you want to share with that, but yeah.
I think no, I think that's a very powerful testimony. I mean, I was there for all that journey, and I remember when you sent me that mark or that video, I was just as delighted as you were. I was just like, "Oh my God." And I think that God is good, and God is and I it's so beautiful how you said that God turned a day that was very somber and turn it into, wow, I see the blessing at the end.
Right.
And now I can go back to that memory and think, yes, as scary as it was, I wouldn't know how good God is to me had it not been for that moment.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's almost like you're thankful for it. Like
Yeah.
it came around,
It's that song and verse of like, he's turned my sorrows
into
into joy.
joy.
He's turned my mourning into dancing.
And I mean, and again, I know you said that is specific to monetary situations, but I think that tithing doesn't just stay with money. Like, it's not just I give money to receive money.
Right.
I think it's much more than that. And I think even in your situation, it was more than just the forgiveness of the money.
Right.
It was exactly what we're saying. A very sad day turned into, I saw God's glory once again.
Right.
So much so that if He doesn't do nothing for me, He's done it all already. And I think that's what we're both trying to say, of like, it's not just give money to receive money to
Right.
cash it in a couple days. Maybe He'll give me that mansion I want. No, I'm doing this principle out of obedience. you know Offering is different. I think offering for me is out of love, but I'm doing tithing out of obedience. um and then later, somewhere in my family, somewhere in my situations, I'll reap the benefit of it, because God is that good. God is that faithful that He'll give you those benefits. And it doesn't have to be monetary. It can be a family member came to the Lord. It can be um my health. In my health, I've been I was sick, and now I'm not. It could be very different, the various things. So I do not, I mean, I have situations that have happened, like my car situation, that I was able to solve that and everything, and still gives me a couple issues. But but I don't think, or even my situation with taxes. But I think what I keep seeing is that God is a God of Dios es un Dios de orden. And so cuando tú tienes orden en tu vida, como que te bendice poquito más. Okay. No estoy diciendo que Dios no bendice al desorganizado, porque entonces I wouldn't be here, ¿verdad? Pero I am starting to realize that when you want to have order in your life, God is like, he gets pleased by that. That pleases Him, and He's like, I'm gonna help you even more then, because you want what's within, what's my nature, which is orden. Mm-hmm. And so yo me he dado cuenta que uh, uh, even though me hace falta más, ¿cómo se dice? Stewardship.
Right.
When it comes to what God has given me, de todas maneras lo he visto que cuando me he vuelto más intencional, me he vuelto más agradecida, Dios me ha bendecido más. Dios ha habido más y más orden,
Right.
por así decirlo. Entonces, I think que el principio ahí es no nada más da de agradecimiento, sino también el principio es be organized, be a good steward of
Of the resources
of the
that he's
resources
giving
that
you.
God has given you. Y vas a ver que va a haber good consequences to that. There's always good outcomes out of that. And so I think ask me in a year how my finances are. But I do think que todo eso es in order for us to, porque si lo hablas con el dinero y aplicas esa same principle, you can apply it to a lot of areas in your life, not just money.
Yeah.
If you're a good steward in your talent per se, va a haber bendición ahí. If you're a good steward in,
Your time.
in your time,
Yeah.
and in your love, and you're generous, and in todas estas cosas va a haber buenas consecuencias, va a haber un buen outcome. And so I think maybe that's what God is trying to teach us with money. What better way than with money that is already a touchy subject for a lot of us.
Right.
And so I think it's one of those things where si en lo pequeño me eres fiel, cuanto más en lo grande. And so por eso Dios se agrada de cuando eres fiel en lo pequeño, porque entonces a él le da gusto porque va a decir vas a poder en lo grande.
Right.
And
I think, if you're watching our podcast and you're like, this whole concept is very foreign to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of like, first of all, I don't believe, and I don't, give to a church, how could this apply to me? How could I relate to you? I think the best way that I could somehow bridge that is that when something is important to you, you will give your best to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what this is, because our faith is the utmost importance to us in the resources that we have, or not even just resources, but in what we have to give. We're going to give our best.
Right.
Our time, that's why we go to church. Our fellowship, that's why it's important to us to consider how we present ourselves and how we treat others, because our faith even in that is tied in our money and where our money is going. And a lot of people don't realize that, but you give to which you love the most. So if you ever do an analysis of where your money is going, oh, my money goes mainly to, the gym. Un ejemplo, okay, that's probably something that's very important to you. Or my money goes to food. That's probably something that's very important to you, or like my money goes towards, my business, my children, my marriage, my outings. If you really do an analysis, you'll come to find out that you're giving your money to that which you love the most. And in our, faith, we don't give everything that we have. We can't, but we do put God first in that in that setting, and if that makes, a bit of sense, maybe the best way that you can apply this is, is there something that perhaps I should be giving more of my resources and time to? And I'm maybe spending too much time on my phone and Instagram, and I should be spending more time with my husband, my kids, my family. Am I eating too much unhealthy food? And maybe I should start to think about my health and the future and the longevity of the quality of my life. Maybe I should look in that. And so that's the best way that I could try to bridge.
That's a very good way.
But for my friends who who do identify with the same faith or similar in our faith, if you are thinking, like, why do we have to give? Or, why does it have to be 10%? I want to bring the story of, I believe is it Priscilla and Aquila? Or Aquila? The ones that died?
Oh, I think so.
Something like that. I'll attach the story. In sweet, simple, short, the story goes that the disciples were working together to kind of bring all of their resources together to help one another build the church. And it says that in the Bible they shared that which everything they had. They were just using it. And there was this couple, I believe that those were their names, and they sold a terreno, some land, and they brought it to the disciples. And the husband, I think, went first, and he said, oh, this is how much we received from selling this land. We're going to give it for the mission. We're going to give it for the Lord. And Peter, the apostle, asks him, is this all that you received? Was this everything you received? And the husband said, yes, it was everything, even though it was a lie. He was withholding some of the money. And it says that after he said that, he died because it was a lie. They took the body out, and then a couple hours later, the wife shows up, and she's, saying, we sold this much money or whatever. This is what we got from selling the terreno. And Peter says, is this everything that you received? And she said, yes. Boom, she dies. Oh. And the Bible says that this brought fear upon everyone, because they were like, what was going on? And the point of that story is not that they died or they were punished because they should have given everything. The moral of that story is that they didn't have to give anything. But because they wanted to appear as if they were giving, as if they were giving their best.
Everything. Mm-hmm.
That's where the in a sense the punishment was. That's where the like, why did you lie? Mm-hmm. So I guess in what I'm saying to those of you that are Christians and are kind of in the middle of like, do I give? First and foremost, like I mentioned, give as you've decided in your heart. If you don't believe in the 10% percentage, fine. But in the percentage that you do give, or in the amount that you do give it with all of your heart.
Right.
It's all in the attitude. It's all in why you're doing what you're doing. And I would go as far as even to challenge, why do you have that mindset? When we're talking about if God is what we value the most and our faith is of utmost importance, why do we have this attitude of, ¿por qué tengo que dar? Mm-hmm. And that's all that I will say there. But beyond that, this is pretty much our tithing episode. Every month we are going to tackle a different subject on, a lot of like faith-based concepts or faith-based practices and stuff like that, and why we do what we do. But essentially, our goal is not so much to say, okay, you're going to go to hell if you don't do it this way. It's to bring in light on why this is our conviction and where we came to that, and why we do why we do.
Yes. So thank you so much, guys. We hope this was of some edification and that you're walking away at least thinking about it. If you, again, please don't rush to give.
We'll put in the link in the bottom.
Yeah, it's just what do they call it? Food for thought.
Yeah.
Think about it, chew on it, do the research, come up with your own conviction. I think that's what we want to do with our conviction series. We want to relate, this is our conviction, but it might not be yours, but find out why it's not yours. Find out why you have a different conviction and share that with others, and also for those of you that might not, have our same faith or even doctrine, or do it in other areas like Kez was mentioning. Do it with your time, do it with your how generous you are with your love, and so again, thank you so much for everything. We hope you enjoyed it, and please click a like, or subscribe to us, share it with someone else. We hope you have a lovely day, or day, or week, because it's on Monday. So God bless. Bye.